Pulse is an incredible Japanese horror film created by Kiyoshi Kurosawa. The plot revolves around multiple young adults living in Japan that are introduced to a dial-up service that connects the users to spirits. I adore Kiyoshi's films as they're incredibly well shot and the frames are beautifully composed. The film is chock full of visual symbolism, especially through the representation of the spirits. But while it's aesthetically pleasing, the aspect that makes the film so amazing is the horror it presents, without being gruesome or relying on classic horror tropes such as jump scares, but it presents a slow, creeping terror that is built by making the watcher feel as isolated as the characters. The film definitely is trying to convey the isolation that comes with the use of computers and more modern technology in general, but how people decide to spend their time locked away in their rooms, escaping life through the internet, how this isolation leads them to disconnect from society and those closest to them. It can be seen in the start of the film for those who are on the outside of the effects of the program that their clothing is vibrantly colored. Also, while being in these large concrete buildings, they are surrounded by potted plant life, which grabs your attention, but you may have noticed as the film unfolds, these colors become more scarce as they fall further into the rabbit hole of trying to figure out what's happening. Their clothing becomes duller, the plants are less prevalent and drab in color, but the more prevalent symbolism comes through the visions of the dead and the depiction of the ghosts. But before this, I really enjoyed the way that the film explained the existence of the ghosts. That the spirit realm has a finite capacity, however large it may be, that once it's full, these spirits have to find another place to exist, so they find their way back into our world. I found that interesting that spirits are not bound to exist in the world because they have like unfinished business or a connection to the world that they can't leave, but that they couldn't fit in the spirit realm. I liked it because it gives a reason for why the spirits are so devious, that they live their lives and want to move on to the next stage of their spirit's existence, but the world is forcing them to remain in this mortal coil they thought they had left, that they had felt the release of death, but are still stuck anchored to the world, unable to pass on. One of the few vibrant colors that can be seen throughout the entire film comes from the radiatingly bright red tape that's used to section off the rooms determined to be haunted, but it's presented to the viewer as something that happened naturally, and what is displayed as the first of these haunted rooms. A worker decided to mark off the doors, but he has no tape, so he asked another worker if he had any, and was given a roll of bright red tape. But this room is eventually demolished, and in its mess of wires, the port for a DSL modem could be seen, implying that the ghost then jumped into the device. While this seems like a natural occurrence that the red tape was put up to cover the single door, it's a symbol that appears throughout the entire film to indicate the presence of spirits, a caution that is usually dismissed by the characters in the story. Shadows make up a lot of these depictions. This can be seen with the moving shadows from the arcade scene, or the shadows of the deceased, which are shown through ash covering the wall in the shape of a body. That this can also be seen by the spirit of a woman who torments Junko. The spirit wearing a black robe with a hood and long black hair, which is running forward over her face, looking like a living shadow other than her pale hands which poke out from the baggy robe. And you can't forget the final shade with the pale face which Ryosuke confronts in the end of the film. There's a scene near the midpoint of the film where Haru and Ryosuke meet and talk about the situation. Haru brings up how she has wondered what it's like to die, that she was always alone and scared of dying alone, that how could you ever spend your life in isolation not knowing if you'll be in isolation for eternity after death, that it's possible once you find your way to the other side, it could be a paradise where our souls live together again, but it could also be an endless void, that you could spend your whole life trying to find someone to be with in the end just to be cast into complete loneliness once dead, that nothing changes with death, that feeling of isolation and loneliness will continue. I think these ideas are what cause the ghost to be so vicious, not only that they're stuck back in this worldly realm, but that they feel complete loneliness. Since they cannot connect with people, being a spirit or a different form of consciousness, they take out the pain of feeling complete loneliness on the world, and specifically the people using the internet. That these people are already prone to these feelings as they are endlessly scrolling through the internet, in most cases to escape life. But if the ghost being is defined by their loneliness, then what is the difference between the ghosts and the people that are connected to the program? That they self-isolate and lose themselves to the computer, that they forget about life and live in dread until they are led to ending their lives. This leads to a conversation about human nature. What makes a person a living being is the fight to stay alive and push on, that a person has hope for themselves and their life, that a human's existence is based on the knowledge that they are alive, that they have to provide for themselves to remain alive, that they have to function in society, but once this is given up upon, what's the difference between the ghost and the person but the vessel they exist in? That the soul of a person that has no hope, has no drive, has no want to live, is as empty as the ghost. These feelings can be seen to be built on by Haru's mind, and it becomes apparent in the scene, especially when Ryusuke asks her if she would want to live forever, but she seems reluctant to reply, that she is slowly losing hope in her own life, that the loneliness she has felt since she was younger has permanently stained the way she looks at life. Haru states ghosts won't kill people. That would just make more ghosts. Instead, they will try to make people immortal by quietly trapping them in their loneliness. This is one of the most important statements in the entire film, which I think separates Pulse from most horror films. They aren't building up this incredibly scary monster that is destroying these people's lives, but the film emphasizes that it's the people isolating themselves, falling into a pattern of behavior that causes them to be constantly alone, leading them to kill themselves, that the ghosts want the people to be trapped in their loneliness. This may be a stretch, but I see this as the ghosts want to rid themselves of loneliness. While they cannot connect with the people, they can push them into isolating themselves to their room where the ghost can exist with the people. This, in a way, connects to when Haru finds the forbidden room and she sees the man take his own life. Then a video of herself appears on the screen. She finds that the camera doesn't exist, but that the video is coming from a spirit that is in the room. But rather than being scared, she saw the existence of the spirit as comforting, that she wasn't alone, that there was a presence in the room which made her feel full from the empty, lonely state that she had felt through the rest of her life. I think that her eventual decision to take her own life relates to the experience that Ryosuke has with the ghost he meets when he walks into the taped room, that the ghost would say anything to change the path the person is traveling down, that in the way that the ghost reveals to Ryosuke that death is eternal loneliness, that the ghost might have revealed to Haru that she would not be alone in death, but this may take away from the other thoughts I had earlier, that the ghost would want to keep the people alive in torment, since she felt so lonely in life that if she felt like she knew how death worked and that her loneliness would end, she would want to kill herself, that her one fear, as most people's, is the unknowing of what happens once we die, but it's also possible that the ghost told Haru the same as Ryosuke, that she would be alone forever and she decided to take her life out of a loss of hope. But the experience with Ryosuke meeting with the spirit truly reveals the plot to the audience, as he finally faces the ghost he has been chasing. In a scene which felt like his end, it turns out that the spirit was physically harmless, even though he showed Ryosuke that he physically existed, that the ghost didn't want to harm Ryosuke, that he wanted to feel a connection to him, that he wanted to have eye contact with Ryosuke, have Ryosuke acknowledge his presence and touch his body. But this scene ends in an odd way where Ryosuke is seen to be shrouded in a black stain, but he is the first person in the film to have a black stain but not die. Whether this means that the spirit lives on with him, or that he was touched with isolation but he willed himself out of it, I guess is up to interpretation. Now the text that was seen covering the walls in the forbidden rooms translates to "help me." This appears constantly throughout the film. While it was made initially to look like the people were writing it on the walls, it is presumed in the end that it's the spirits creating the writing, since it appears every time a person becomes affected, that it's a cry for help from the ghost. I also found it interesting that the program near the end of the film led to apocalyptic levels of damage to society. Planes falling from the sky and smokestacks can be seen popping up across the city skylines, that this disease spreads throughout the world in the network like a computer virus, once released slowly duplicating itself and bringing more and more people into its stranglehold. Just as there is a lot of good that can come from the interconnectedness of the internet, that once something awful is spread using it, it affects all people just as the good aspects of the internet affects all of its users. The last bit of introspection in the film from Michi: death comes to us all, if so, maybe we would be happier if we had gone with the rest, but we choose to keep going into the future. Highlights that the fall of society came from a loss of hope that was spread and took hold on the entire world. While the spirits exist and directed the people into this path, it was ultimately the decision of the people to lose hope in their present and future. I think the message of this film, while it uses dial-up to portray it, is more necessary today than it was when the film was released. The internet has only gotten bigger and the devices have only gotten faster. I really enjoyed this film, and I highly recommend watching any of Kiyoshi Kurosawa's horror films. There truly are very few and far between complex narrative horror films made in America, but Japanese filmmakers have definitely mastered this style, and I hope you enjoyed listening to this as much as I enjoyed making it, and I'll see you later.